A reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verses 1 to 6, 15 to 18. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honoured by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go to your room, close the door, pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. When you fast, do not look sombre as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. There was once a rich Jew who never gave alms to the poor or contributed to charitable causes. People in his small village never called him by name. They simply referred to him as the miser. One day, a beggar came to the door of the miser. "Where do you come from?" the miser asked. "I live in the village," answered the beggar. "Nonsense," cried the miser. "Everyone in this village knows that I do not support beggars." In that same village there lived a poor shoemaker. He was a most generous man who responded to every person in need and every charitable cause that was brought to his attention. No one was ever turned away empty-handed from his door. One day the miser died. The village leaders decided to bury him on the edge of the cemetery. No one mourned his passing. No one followed the funeral procession to the place of burial. As the days and the weeks passed, the rabbi heard disturbing news about the shoemaker. "He no longer gives alms to the beggars," complained one man. "He refuses every charity that's approached him," said another. "Has anyone asked about this change?" asked the rabbi. "Yes," said the first man. "He says that he no longer has any money to give away." Soon the rabbi called on the shoemaker. "Why have you suddenly ceased giving money to worthy causes?" Slowly the shoemaker began to speak. "Many years ago, the man called the miser came to me with a huge sum of money and asked me to give it to beggars and charities. He made me promise that I would not reveal the source of the money until after he died. Once every month he would visit me secretly and give me more money to give away. I became known as a great benefactor, even though I never spent a penny of my own money. I'm surprised that no one has questioned me earlier. How could anyone who earned the wages of a shoemaker give away as much money as I have all these years?" The rabbi called all the villagers together and told them the story. The miser has lived by the scriptures, keeping his charity a secret. Then they all walked to the grave of the miser and prayed. Before the rabbi died, he asked to be buried near the fence next to the grave of the man known as the miser. Can you remember Keeping Up Appearances and Hyacinth Bouquet, whose whole purpose in life seems to be impressing people, letting them know how posh she is, always out to impress those people from the upper echelons of society, and shunning those who she thinks are beneath her, including her sister and brother-in-law. She's a snob, and she's desperately trying all the time to convince everybody that she's from the upper classes, but the reality is far different. She lives in a nice but ordinary house, in an ordinary street. Her husband does an ordinary job in an office or something like that. And her sister and brother-in-law are definitely not posh. Her surname is Bucket, but she pronounces it Bouquet. And she answers the phone. The Bouquet residence, the lady of the house speaking. She's always out to impress her neighbours, and they live in constant fear of being invited to one of her soirees. She lives a life constantly keeping up appearances, trying to look good to everyone else, when the reality is often far different. In this passage, Jesus is addressing those who have a tendency to do the same spiritually. So what are we to do? Are we to stop practicing our righteousness so others might see it? Or are we to let our light shine before others so they may see our good works? The interesting thing is, neither is what we do. They are about why we do what we do. They are about who the intended audience is. In the New Testament, seeing is a very important concept. What we see is important. What is seen about us is important. Why is that important? Well, the theologian David Lause writes about this passage, and he suggests that to be seen is not simply to be noticed, but to matter, to count, to be validated in the eyes of another. What Jesus teaches in today's gospel lesson is if, like Hyacinth, we worry about how others see us, then the greatest reward we will ever hope to receive is their admiration. But if we focus like the miser instead on how God sees us, if we base our sense of who we are on God, who is less interested in the actions that we take and more interested in the character of our hearts, if that is most important to us, then the reward we receive will be a living and growing relationship with God. A living and growing relationship with God. A God who knows the secret thoughts of our hearts, and who at the same time loves us enough even to die for us.